Hi, this is Patrick Moraz, and you are listening to John Broughton on KC Radio.
You were, I guess, a multi-instrumentalist at a young age. Was it always going to be classical music for you at that point?
Well, you see, I started violin when I was like three and a half, 4. At a very young age, my parents wanted me to start violin, and I was not made for the violin. So I did about a year and a half, and then I had discovered the piano by myself. The violin for me, but I did it. You know, I understand the mechanics and so on. But I'm much more of a percussive and a pianist and keyboard player as such. You know, so I developed some kind of blues and jazz inspiration before I even started classical music on piano, and also learned how to play marimbas and vibraphone, and you know, percussion. I love the drums as well. So you know, I'm much more of a player in that kind of direction. But I played also at an early age. At the age about 9, I started to start learning trumpet, and the alpine horn. Later on, I played all the trumpets. You know, from cavalry trumpet to you know, the valve trumpet and so on, bugle, and I played also some trombone. Of course, I wanted to learn how to play flute and you know, all kinds of instruments. So as a multi-instrumentalist, yes, I can say I'm a multi-instrumentalist, not in a virtuosic way though, you know. Maybe my best virtuosity is on the piano or on the keyboard, you know.
Was there a particular point in time when you made that decision to make the piano your main focus?
Yeah, well, I was supposed to be playing classical music, and I broke the 4 fingers of my hand and my right arm at 6 weeks difference when I was 13, as I was preparing for a classical kind of competition in Switzerland. So that made me decide to just practice my left hand and start composing my own music, because I was told by my teachers that I could never play classical music the way it should be played again. So I decided to compose my own music, you know, and that's really what made me decide to concentrate on the piano and the vibraphone. The vibraphone was my first professional instrument, and also at a very kind of early age, around 16, 17, and then I won a couple of jazz festivals which entitled me to have some, you know, master classes with Stefan Grappelli, and also to open a little bit later on to open some concerts in Europe, concerts of John Coltrane and his quartet, you know. So I went with my quartet, and I was invited to kind of open for John Coltrane, and I learned a lot from that, because I used to love jazz and being able to all these fantastic players, you know.
How do you look back on that period on the jazz festival circuit around Europe in the 60s in terms of your development as a musician?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I jammed a lot with a lot of American musicians at the time, and whether it was like in the modern jazz idiom or even in the Dixieland jazz idiom, you know. But you know, rock and roll was making its mark, and my parents didn't want me to touch rock and roll, so you know, it took me a long time to get acquainted to that, and I immediately decided, though after the Beatles and the Rolling Stones had already started their mark on the world, I decided to go to England instead of to go to France or Germany like the people from Europe were doing, you know. And because I wanted to learn English, but I also wanted to play with some English musicians and some English groups. And you know, the only way I could do it was to go to England. You know, really, and that's really how I started in that kind of genre. You know.
One of your early bands was a band called Main Horse. Tell us about that outfit.
Yes, the Main Horse band was really, it was really a group. It was not my first rock group, but it was the first studio album that I recorded with Main Horse, which is a 4-piece group, and there was 3 other musicians: Peter Lockett on guitar, Jean Ristori, my very good friend, who's still my friend, you know, from Switzerland, and has remastered all my CDs on bass and cello. Very young drummer that we had auditioned in London, and he was only 16 at the time. So when I had to ask his mother to let me bring him to Switzerland to play with us, you know, and that was a fantastic experience. We played, of course, all instruments, sang the harmonies as well, and you know, we played mainly in France, in Switzerland, and of course in Germany very regularly. With, you know, into all the clubs that all these future English groups were playing as well, like Supertramp. We had the same manager as the guy who managed Supertramp, and in some instances, Supertramp were opening for us. We were opening for them as well, but they were opening for us more times than us, you know. So that's great. And we recorded their first demos because they used to live in Geneva. And with Main Horse, we had the chance to record our first album in London in late '69, early '70 in the studio that Deep Purple were using in Marble Arch, I think that was, you know. So we had a fantastic time with this group, and you know, we moved to England eventually, and we had a very rocking kind of start, you know.
Did you go to England with a plan in place of what direction your career may take there?
No, we just wanted to go and live in England, and we just asked our manager to send us to England. We rented a house and got a truck, and we had instruments, and we started to do some gigs, you know, up and down the freeway, in and around London, and as well, Holland and so on, and we just stayed a couple of years in England, you know, playing around, you know, and starting and you know, doing this and that and the other, and then eventually the group disbanded due to a you know, not a lack of interest, but you know, in early days the groups form and disband and so on, and it was a very kind of a transitional kind of time. So we decided, John and I, we decided to pursue our musical career by, I accepted a job doing, being a musical director to a ballet company from Brazil, and we had to audition the music in Hamburg. So we went to Hamburg, auditioned, got the gig, and off we went to Japan via Hong Kong and so on, you know. So, and we stayed about 6 months in the Far East. We stayed 2 or 3 months in Japan, touring all over Japan with that ballet company, and then we went to Hong Kong, and I got some gigs for the band. For my, you know, the ballet had dispersed, but the group, my musical group, was staying. So it was called the Latin Jazz Rock Trio. Mm-hmm. And we were 4. So we had a couple of percussionists, very good percussionists from Brazil, and the bass and keyboards, you know. So we stayed in Hong Kong. We played all over the place, you know, on television, and We even have some articles in the press and so on. We played in the biggest hotels, and we played for some fashion défilés as well on some. That was a really good time. And then we came back with that. I had in mind to restart writing some film scores, and I got the chance to score the movie The Invitation in Switzerland in early '73, and that movie won the Cannes Festival. It won not the Golden Palm, but just the prize after that. It's called the Grand Prix du Jury, the jury's grand prize, you know. And so that was very good, and I was very sought after, you know, as a musician for films, as a composer, and also as a kind of a session man, you know. Mm. So that was really, really good. And you know, one day, that's going to be probably your next question. Your next question might be, what did you have to say? I was called by Lee Jackson, whom I had met in '69. Lee Jackson, who was originally with the Nice, with Brian Davison and of course Keith Emerson. And I received a call in Geneva, and Lee, that I had met only once 4 years previous to that call, asked me, "Hey Patrick, do you remember me?" He said, "Hey mate, why don't you get your ass over to London, and we start a trio with Brian. You know, we'd like to do something like the Nice. We don't have a name for the band, but we'd like to do it." So the next day I was on a plane off to London, and that's how we started what was going to become Refugee. Mm.
Did you have high hopes for that band?
We had a very, very good time. It took about 3 to 4 months of really and very intensive, rehearsing, composing, arranging, and so on. I was composing all the music for the band, and it took 3 to 4 months before we played our first gigs in London and around London, also up and down the freeway. And then in the winter of '74, we recorded the album, the eponymous album, that was called Refugee. And we had a very, very good, brilliant producer, John Burns, who had just produced 2 albums of Genesis for the same label, that we were going to be on, Charisma Records, which also, of course, had not only Genesis, but was going to have later on, when Genesis split, Peter Gabriel and also Phil Collins, and they had another group called Hawk. So the Monty Python comedians, so it was a very happening little label. It was not a major, of course, not a major comedy, but very, very happening little label, and we had a good time recording for them.
So, how did your recruitment into the band Yes come about?
That's a very, very, very big question. Of course, I was still with Refugee, and we were still touring, and we were having difficulty getting a producer, also getting the funding from the record company. Although the first album, the first Refugee album, did very well. I think it went to 28 in the charts. Somebody told me that, of course, Yes was looking at. I saw all over the paper that Yes was looking for all over Europe, maybe all over the world. I remember Vangelis having tried, being in Yes for 2 weeks, and when I went to see them, when I was asked to go and see a rehearsal, of course, which was turning to be an audition, I played Vangelis' keyboards, and they were all out of tune. I had to tune them and so on. Anyway, a call came to my apartment in London the day after I had just finished a big movie in Switzerland and France with Gérard Depardieu. And I was just on my way back to London. We still had about 2 concerts with Refugee to do, and a call came, and it was his manager at the time, Brian Payne, who asked me if I wanted to come and see a rehearsal. And I said, yes, of course, I'd love to see a rehearsal. You know, people had already hinted that I would be eventually the next replacement for a while in Yes, and you know, I talked about it to my friends in Refugee. I didn't really want to be in Yes because at the time, because I thought maybe, you know, I had so much to say about my, you know, compose my own music and so on. I thought just to be yet another keyboard player in Yes, you know, I didn't want to do that. But anyway, they made me kind of an offer I couldn't refuse. And the next thing I knew is that everything had been reorganized, and they wanted me in the band, you know.
Mm.
I think they were pretty impressed by the way I played during that kind of audition / jam session, you know. And I played some stuff, you know, some counterpoint stuff and harmony, and you know, I composed, of course, and that's history. I composed the first introduction to the piece called Soundcheck, and I had Rick and Chris and Alan rehearsed it with me on the spot. I explained to them what I wanted, and we played it, and it was recorded, and that's what's on the record of that day. So, you know, I think they were sufficiently impressed to ask me, you know, the next day I had the gig.
Mm.
And although it was very difficult for me, it was a very difficult decision. My friends from Refugee, Lee and Brian, wished me the best and told me they would have done the same. You know.
It must have been quite Sorry. it must
it was a shock, you know. Yeah, it was a shock.
Yeah. It certainly must have been challenging for you to replace such a high-profile musician as Rick Wakeman in Yes. How did you approach your role in that band?
Yes, it was not so much that the fact. Yes, of course, he was a very high-profile player, but it's not so much the you know, shock was not so much from that. It was the fact that I had to learn technically 8 albums, since Topographic Oceans was 2 albums, you know. I had 8 kind of albums, 8 mini symphonies to learn, on top of the fact that I had to also learn the material which had been already composed for the album Relayer. Not all of it, but because we composed some of the Relayer together with Yes, I was included in the compositional stages, but it was a very difficult kind of transition. Since I had only a few days and then eventually a few weeks to prepare everything, to jump from 7 keyboards to a multi-keyboard setup of 14 keyboards and so on, and you know, get all my stuff together. That was very, very difficult. So, you know, I did it because I you know, I didn't want to doing it, so I did it, and we went on tour. And so that's, you know, I mean, Yes had a very complex musical lifestyle in a way, you know. So we really rehearsed only about a week before going on tour. The rest was spent in the studio, in different studios, completing the album Relayer, and you know, I was preparing the recordings and composing and writing down the arrangements for the rest of the tour and so on. So it was a very, very difficult situation, you know. But I think the people really loved it, and you know, it took me about 3 to 4 gigs to really get acquainted to the whole material on stage when we started in America in November of '74, and then the rest is we did it, you know, and I really, really enjoyed my stay with Yes very much, and we also composed a lot together for what was going to be going for the one. Although I might not have ended up on the final tapes, I was instrumental to the whole compositional effort and the group effort of composing the whole of not only Relay, but of course even more going for the one, you know, and including that piece of Wakeman and so on.
Yeah, I believe your departure from Yes wasn't a happy one. Without going too much into bad memories, can you just give us a brief rundown on what exactly happened there?
Yeah, I think you know, having reflected upon it over the years, you know, I think it was kind of a political move from their part to bring Rick back because you know, there was a lot of interests at stake and so on, and I didn't want to leave, you know. I didn't want to leave the band, but it was not a musical or personality question. I think it was more a political question, and the fact that Rick was very, very successful on his own, but he was losing money. He was losing tons of money with his Arthur on Ice and so on, and you know, and the management. He had the same manager as we had as Yes, you know, in Brian Lane. I think Brian Lane wanted him to be back in Yes to make some money and you know, to sponge his. I don't know. I think that's what exactly. That's kind of how things happened, you know. I think he did a great job, and you know, I was happy for Yes to see him back. Although I would have loved to stay much longer in Yes. I mean, why it happened like that, you know. It was very difficult. It was a very difficult time. So I was left on the street of my own country, mind you, you know, like. In the cold of November, you know, mid-November in Switzerland, it's very cold, you know. And the mother of my daughter had come from Brazil. My daughter was about 1 month old, and I was left like on the streets of Switzerland without any fucking money and without anything, you know. And that was a very hard time. I had a very hard time to redress the situation to my advantage, and fortunately, I had a nice record company who understood the fact and gave me the means to pursue my solo career and you know, to come out with the album Out in the Sun, which I recorded in that same week, early January, and until March I recorded Out in the Sun. Yeah.
Did that unpleasant experience make it a little bit of a worry for you? Were you a little nervous about joining another major band when the opportunity arose to join the Moody Blues?
No, not at all. Not at all, because, you know, it was about a year and a half later. It was in 78, you know, in May or June of 78 that I got the invitation to join the Moodies and to go to do an audition in July. I was living in Brazil at the time, but I got the call in Miami. I was on my way back to Brazil. I went to Brazil and then organized a couple of concerts in Switzerland to pay for my passage back to England. And I played also at the Jazz Festival of Montreux in 78, and I played in Zurich in June of 78. And then July 17th, I think it was 78, I blues in their own studio in the north of London, and all my equipment, you know, I had kept my road crew paid and alive, you know, for the last 18 months. So all my keyboards were ready. I had about 17 keyboards, and I had a fantastic rig, all in tune and everything. I think they were very impressed even before I arrived. And of course, we played 3 pieces, you know, that I had learned from the repertoire. You know, I played Tuesday Afternoon, Nights in White Satin, and the Legend of a Band. And at some point, I remember I even had to tell them which chord to play where, or which accent to do, because they hadn't played live together for 4 years. So it was a very good experience, and they welcomed me with open arms. Of course, you know, I mean, it made the Moodies some kind of a super group at that time. And I remember that a few. Once again, in the beginning of November, I think we started in Seattle, our American leg of the tour. It was absolutely sold out. All the gigs we played, you know, we had like 25,000 people every night, and it was like unbelievable. We had a fantastic reception from everybody, and the whole thing was a complete success. Of course, a couple of years later, we started recording Long Distance Voyager, and I was a major kind of force in the compositional aspect as well, of all the arrangements and the colors and the orchestral and tonal colors of the band and so on, and we had a great time. And of course, Long Distance Voyager came to number one across the board and was extremely well received as a first album with me. You know, it was fantastic. It came to number. So, you know, the rest was history. I mean, I spent about 10 years, an extra 10 years with them. You know, so altogether I was 12 years with the Moodies, and that was a fantastic experience. You know.
Do you look back on that time more fondly than your time in Yes?
Very much.
Yeah.
Very much. Like with Yes, I tell you. It was all, they were completely different personalities and a different band and different kind of music. However, I had an equal great time with both bands, and of course, going on tour with those kind of machineries is a fantastic experience. I mean, of course, also with the Moodies, we came. I had the chance to play with them twice in Australia, and I remember very well that we played in 1984 and in 1984, yeah. 1984 and 1987.
That's right. Yep, I was there.
We had a fantastic time. Played in in all these places. I think we played each time in Melbourne as well. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I remember seeing it very well. It was a memorable.
Oh, you
night.
Remember the concert? Yeah.
I was there. Yeah.
Oh, good.
You were certainly able to explore outside projects too during your time with the Moodies. Was that extremely important for you at the time to have the freedom to do that?
It was important. I could have done without it, mind you, because I always compose and record, whether I'm in a gig, whether I'm in a group, or whether I'm not in a group. You know, I've always done that all over since I started composing when I was like 13, 14. I've always composed and played, and of course with the Moodies, and of course with Yes as well. I had the means, as most of my earnings, to complete my own solo projects, and I didn't get shy about it, and I was involved in many projects, many more even than my solo albums. I remember having done even some commercials for Pepsi and some other things, and involved in some other people's production, mainly from France and from Switzerland, And also I had even created, I think I was starting to create another band on the side, in England, with a couple of very, very good songwriters and players, So that overall, it was a fantastic opportunity for me to do that. At the same time, as I was always giving the Moodies priority over any project, As soon as they would call me, I was on call, And like with Yes, of course. That's why when I did my first solo album with Yes, my first of the next 3 solo albums, The Story of I, when they called me to come back to rehearsal at the end of 75, very beginning of 76, I immediately came back to London upon their recommendation, and to the point that I couldn't even finish the mix, personal mix of my own solo album. I had to delegate that mix and kind of mix by phone, And the results showed a little bit of laxism there, especially in the fact that they probably were a little too many keyboards in the overall mix, as opposed to the detriment of the bass and the drums. Not a really big deal, but a couple of reviews and criticism, asking me why it became like that, and that's the reason. That's really the reason. But now, having remastered those albums and those tapes, I found, of course, the original masters, and I've had them remastered by my friend Jean in Switzerland. I brought everything back there, and we spent many weeks and months remastering, all my collection of albums. I've got to say that the mix are much, there are things that we're discovering now that we hadn't even noticed before.
Right. So
The remasters are much crisper. The sound is crisper, is more detailed, and so on. And I think if the people take the time to really listen, they will enjoy the results.
So it has made you look back on some of your past work in a whole new light.
Oh yeah.
Did you remain a fan of the music of both Yes and the Moody Blues after you?
Absolutely. Oh yeah. I haven't, I've always liked Yes, of course. To tell you the truth, I stayed a little bit within the confines of what they'd done probably until the end of the 70s, but I was aware of what Trevor Rabin brought to the band, which was brilliant, in terms of rock, and the songs he brought, and the new guitar approach. Although I've always liked what Steve was doing, but I think Trevor brought another edge to the band, and I really like that. I haven't been too concerned about listening to their new recordings past the 90s, to tell you the truth, because I'm up to talk, I think, and I've heard, of course, I've heard Magnification and a couple of other pieces or albums like that on the radio, but I haven't spent any time really listening like I used to listen to Yes music at the time.
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah.
And same for the Moody Blues. Past Keys of the Kingdom and past my departure, I kind of, not that I lost interest, but I had much less interest, being not involved, of course, with the group as a core, player and co-arranger and co-composer of the music. I mean, not the song. I mean, I was never let. I was never kind of in brackets allowed really to compose. It's a lot of political things because of course the composer of the songs make a lot of money. So I was invited to co-compose one piece. I would have liked to compose many more songs with them, but that was not to be. So anyway, there's always other outlets.
Yeah.
Of course, but I still enjoy listening to the Moodies now and again. I even sometimes go and if I do a jam or if somebody asks me to play a song of the Moodies, of course I'd indulge playing it, because it was great, and I had the best time with them as well, I have absolutely no regrets. The only regret I have is not to have been able to stay longer, in a way, with them, because it was a very, very good gig, and I think I gave them my best,
Now, you've mentioned earlier some of the work you've done in movie soundtracks. Is there a particular procedure that you go through when you're taking on that kind of work?
Very difficult. You see, it's a very good question. When I'm asked, when I did Switzerland and even Germany at the time, I was composing the music even before the movie was shot, which was great because the director would come and tell me, okay, play me something like that, or imagine some kind of chasing, or imagine some kind of emotional state like that and like that. So I did that, and then he was shooting and cutting his movie to the music. In a way. So that was a great great way to do it. Of course, I've done movies where I haven't done that many movies, mind you. I've done only like about 25 to 30 scores, I think, or 35, counting the commercials. Not like I'm not as in the same bracket as or in the same category as Trevor Rabin. Trevor Rabin is like of movie composers in Hollywood, man. It's like unbelievable. So, my technique of composing could range from looking at the movie and of improvising on some cues, or doing it without seeing the scenes, or doing it with seeing the scenes. It all depends,
Yeah.
Every movie score, everything is always different, Like currently, I'm composing the music for a short movie of 30 minutes. Beautiful visuals, but there's no real story to it, and there's no lyrics, no dialogues, So it's just music and the visuals are so extraordinary. It takes me kind of a long time to come up with the right kind of music, and it's going to be very beautiful when it's finished, I think.
Now, an exciting project you worked on was your Coming Home America tour. Tell us about the concept of that, and what was the inspiration for it?
Yeah, that was at the infancy of the internet. When people, not the infancy of the internet, the internet has been in existence since the 70s already, but for the large public, I think the awareness of really using the internet at home and with the personal computer and so on became in the early 90s. And in 1994, I had the idea to talk with a friend of mine to organize some private concert and some small concerts in churches and in small halls, and even at the house of people. That's why I called it Coming Home America Tour, because that was the acronym of that would be CHAT, the chat tours. And would you believe that I haven't registered that name? I should have registered it on copyright.
Should have, yeah.
Everybody's talking about chat. Everybody's using that word now, But anyway, that was a very interesting thing. It was the first ever one of the very first ever tours completely booked through the internet, directly with the promoters, either private or public promoters, and everything was ironed out via the internet, and that was a very novel kind of idea to do things and to organize a tour like that, So I really enjoyed that. I would have liked to do it more. I think I exhausted the possibilities in 1995, and I haven't been doing any other chat tour since then. But I would maybe do another one of these days. Who knows? Maybe on a different scale, though.
Yeah.
I'm restarting to do some concerts. I've done a live concert for XM Radio Satellite in Washington D.C.
Oh yeah.
And I've done an hour concert just on my own and with my own music, and that was a very very good way to do it. And I'm starting again in November to do some shows. I'm doing one in Seattle in November, and in Santa Fe as well. And then I'm going to go to Switzerland and do some in November and December later on. And coming back probably in the new year, I might be able to organize a solid kind of tour, either on my own or with my some of my best musician friends that I'm playing with.
I read you quoted somewhere as saying that you consider yourself very much a self-taught musician. Do you think your career path would have been different, and your musical journey would have been different had you been more formally trained?
I don't know. The fact that I broke my I was told that I could not play classical music. I might not have become a professional musician if I had only played classical music as such, because it's a completely different path. I don't know. I can't. That's a question I can't really answer. When I say, of course, self-taught, I had a few lessons, very, very few, and I had a few masterclass lessons with some luminaries, like Stefan Grappelli, John Lewis, and some advices from Mike Coitana and Chick Corea and so on, and that really makes up for a lot of lessons in the Conservatory of Music, of course, And Nadia Boulanger also. I followed her master class when I was a kid, 11, and I did some master classes on counterpoint and harmony and counterpoint, and that really allowed me to understand the core of what contrapuntic music is, and that would make up for a lot of lessons.
Now, you've released some piano-based albums in recent years. Was that something you've had a long desire to do? Oh
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love piano music, and I always wanted to do some piano solo albums, which I did. Now I did this trilogy of piano solos, but I've composed many pieces of piano music which I haven't released. They recorded. Some of them are recorded. And I record piano music all the time nowadays, as well as orchestral music, But piano music, it's always been a challenge. Also, that I can go and play anywhere on a piano and do a concert. And whether I improvise the pieces or whether I play some of my set pieces, I always have a vast repertoire of music to play for the listeners, So I really, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to play piano. It's a very, very good challenge. Love piano.
Do you have any musical projects still in mind that you haven't had the opportunity to bring to life yet that you'd still like to do?
Yeah, well, I still would like to do to go back really and to play concerts on a solid basis, on a solid, basis of several concerts a year, or several weeks or several months of concerts a year. Doing all the European festivals, music festivals. I have a cantata which I'm completing, which is made of 25 pieces of music, and it's a very beautiful kind of work which I'd like to explore, but I haven't even started. Yeah, I've had some people demoing some of what I've written. It's all written on paper, and it sounded very good. But of course, there's a vast financial involvement in that, and I've got to find the backers. I have yet to find the backers for that, and there's some ballet stuff and. Some symphonic music that I'd like to put out, And once again, it's always to find the right time, at the right place, with the right product,
True. And just to finish up, Patrick, what would be your best bit of career advice you could give to a young musician starting out?
It's kind of a couple of very important things is to be serious about what one does, to not be afraid to practice and to play and to devote many hours, as many hours as one can, whether one has a hobby, or take it as a hobby or not, and also make sure that if somebody wants to become a professional, to make sure to have a very good management and very good, and make sure that side of the business is taken care of. And that's probably one thing I've been lacking as a solo artist a little bit Although, of course, Phyllis helps me tremendously in what I'm doing, as you probably have noticed.
Yes.
But it has been left aside by my own lack of judgment in a way sometime, and I would have wished I would have taken that probably more seriously. Management is a very important thing, and the difference between some very extremely successful artists, like Elton John or Peter Gabriel or Phil Collins, that's the difference between probably them and me is not so much the output of the music itself or the inspiration of the music, although they all singers, I sing much less. I sing a little bit, but the difference is in the organizational structure as per a very strong management. They all have very, very strong business managers, and that's extremely important.
Terrific.
So that would be the strongest one.
That's good advice.
Of course, the music's important in the first place. There's no musical or artistic career without an artistic product at the base of it. But then it has to be managed.
Yeah. Patrick, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Great, John. Can you believe that we're so many... How many miles are we apart?
Oh, I hate to think. It sounds like you're in the same room with me. It's fantastic.
20,000, 25,000... No, 20,000 miles, right?
Yeah. That's amazing.
And we speak, there's absolutely... There doesn't seem to be any delay.
No.
Maybe a few nanoseconds, but, it's unnoticeable,
Absolutely
it's
amazing.
Fantastic. Are you a musician yourself? I know you're doing a lot of very interesting things with the schools and so on, so that's really good.
Oh, you noticed that, did you?
But are you yourself?
A musician?
Are you a musician?
No, I'm not. Yeah? No. Wish I was, though.
But you're doing things with the schools, right?